The cockpit bathed her in blood-red light as alarms screamed through her headset. She was out of decoys, outnumbered, and flying a jet her commander said she didn't deserve. They called her a keyboard warrior. Today, that desk pilot was their only ticket home. The air in the briefing room at Forward Operating Base Falcon was thick with the smell of stale coffee, floor wax, and unadulterated tension. It was 0400 hours, and the fluorescent lights buzzed with an irritating, high-pitched hum that set Captain Rachel Spool Hardwick's teeth on edge. Rachel sat in the second row, her flight suit immaculate, her posture rigid. At 32, she was an anomaly in the 49th Fighter Squadron. Most of her peers had spent their 20s pulling Gs in F-16s, cutting their teeth on dogfights and close air support. Rachel had spent hers in a windowless bunker in Nevada. She was a systems architect, a tactics analyst, and a simulator instructor. She had practically written the book on the F-35A Lightning II's sensor fusion capabilities. But to the old guard, she was just a sim jockey, a computer nerd who had somehow talked her way into a multi-million-dollar cockpit. That sentiment was currently walking down the center aisle in the form of Lieutenant General Richard Barksdale. Barksdale was a relic of the Cold War, a man who believed air superiority was won with raw horsepower, dogfighting instincts, and a healthy dose of arrogance. He wore his faded leather flight jacket like a suit of armor, the patches on his shoulders telling the story of a man who had seen real combat before Rachel was even born. He stopped at the front of the room, flanked by the squadron commander, Major Bradley Crank Mitchell. The tactical map on the digital whiteboard behind them displayed a jagged topography of hostile territory, a mountainous corridor bordering a heavily militarized rogue state. "Listen up," Barksdale barked, his voice carrying the gravelly weight of countless cigars. "Operation Iron Shield is a go. We have a downed bird, a surveillance drone carrying highly classified cryptographic hardware. It went down in the Kazi Gorge. We are sending in 2 HH-60 Pave Hawks to recover the package before the enemy can get their hands on it. You are the escort." He paused, his cold blue eyes sweeping over the room before landing squarely on Rachel. "This is not a training exercise," Barksdale continued, taking a slow step toward her row. "The enemy knows that bird is down. They are going to be looking for our recovery team. This requires instinct. It requires pilots who know how to feel the air, not just read a damn iPad." He stopped right beside Rachel's chair. His gaze dropped to her left shoulder. Pinned to the Velcro of her flight suit was a morale patch her old simulation unit had given her as a farewell gift. It depicted a winged computer keyboard over a cup of black coffee, with the words "Desk Pilot" stitched in bold yellow thread. It was meant to be an inside joke, a badge of honor for her years designing the electronic warfare tactics that kept these very pilots alive. Barksdale reached out and tapped the patch with a thick, calloused index finger. "A desk pilot," the general scoffed, his voice loud enough for the entire room to hear. A few suppressed snickers rippled through the back rows. "Tell me, Captain Hardwick, if an Su-35 gets on your 6 in that gorge, are you going to send it a strongly worded email, or are you going to try and reboot your jet?" Rachel felt the heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her eyes locked dead ahead. "No, sir. I'm going to use the jet's distributed aperture system to blind his radar, employ a high-off boresight missile, and splash him before he even knows I'm in the same zip code." The room went dead silent. Barksdale let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "Cute. You memorized the brochure. But the sky doesn't care about your algorithms, Hardwick. When the avionics fail, when the screens go black, the only thing that brings you home is the stick and the rudder. You haven't earned the right to wear those wings yet. Don't prove me right today." He turned his back on her and walked to the front of the room. Major Mitchell shot Rachel a sympathetic but warning glare. "Keep your mouth shut," his look said. "Flight assignments," Mitchell announced, pulling up the roster. "I'll be flying lead. Hardwick, you're on my wing. Call sign, Ghost 2. O'Connor, you and Miller are Ghost 3 and 4. We maintain strict emissions control. Total radio silence. We rely on the stealth. If we get painted by enemy radar, we egress. We do not engage unless the Pave Hawks are directly threatened. Understood?" "Yes, sir." The room echoed in unison. Rachel grabbed her helmet bag and stood up. As she filed out of the briefing room, Captain Liam O'Connor fell into step beside her. Liam was a Golden Boy pilot, but he lacked the arrogance of the old guard. "Don't let Iron Dick get to you, Spool," Liam muttered, using Barksdale's less than affectionate nickname. "He's just pissed that the F-35 flies better than he does." "I don't care about his ego, Liam," Rachel said, her knuckles turning white as she gripped her bag. "I care about that tactical brief. The Kazi Gorge is a choke point. If the enemy track the drone going down, they won't just send a patrol. They'll build a kill box. Intel says the air defense systems in that sector are legacy, old SA-6S. Nothing our EW suites can't handle." Rachel shook her head, her analytical mind already racing through the variables. "Intel assumes the enemy is stupid. If they want that crypto hardware, they aren't going to leave it to chance. I've run this exact scenario in the Sims 100 times. It's too quiet. Just stick to Mitchell's wing," Liam advised softly. "Get in, get the package, get out. Prove the old man wrong by being perfectly boring." Rachel didn't answer. As they walked out onto the tarmac, the pre-dawn air was frigid. Sitting on the flight line were the F-35s, their radar-absorbent skin drinking in the faint, ambient light. They looked like predators waiting to be unleashed. Rachel climbed up the ladder and strapped into the ejection seat. She plugged in her helmet-mounted display system, HMDS. The visor powered on, projecting a digital overlay of the world directly into her retinas. The jet booted up, its millions of lines of code syncing with her helmet. To Barksdale, it was a crutch. To Rachel, it was a symphony. She wasn't just sitting in an airplane. She was plugged into the most advanced flying supercomputer ever built, and she was about to take it into a canyon of death. The sun was just beginning to bleed over the jagged peaks of the Kazi mountain range, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange. Ghost Flight was flying low, barely 200 feet above the deck, weaving through the narrow valleys to mask their radar signatures from early warning systems. Far below them, the two HH-60 Pave Hawks looked like dark insects skimming the treetops. Inside the cockpit of Ghost 2, Rachel was in her element. The roar of the Pratt & Whitney F-135 engine was a distant rumble behind the thick layers of her helmet. Before her eyes, the tactical situation was displayed in crisp, glowing symbology. Her jet's sensors were passively drinking in the electronic environment, fusing data from radar warning receivers, thermal cameras, and secure data links. Total emissions control. No radar pulses emitting from their jets. There were ghosts in the machine. Ghost lead, passing waypoint Charlie. Mitchell's voice crackled briefly over the secure intra-flight data link. Rachel checked her displays. Everything looked green. The valley ahead was clear. The downed drone's beacon was pinging faintly, 50 miles ahead. But as she stared at the fused sensor picture, a familiar itch started at the base of her skull. It was the same feeling she used to get in the simulation labs at Nellis when a cadet was trying to pull a fast one on her. She expanded her helmet-mounted display to view the broader electronic warfare EW spectrum. The legacy SA-6 radar sites that Intel had briefed them on were there, painting the upper altitudes with predictable, slow sweeps. It was too predictable. Rachel's fingers danced over her glass cockpit displays, pulling up raw, unfiltered data rather than the computer's sanitized summary. She cross-referenced the thermal signatures of the terrain with the electromagnetic emissions. There, a ghost in the data. A tiny, almost imperceptible fluctuation in the background radiation bouncing off the canyon walls. It's a repeater, Rachel realized, her blood running cold. They're spoofing the old SA-6 signals to cover something else. She had written a white paper on this exact tactic 2 years ago. By flooding the valley with low-grade legacy radar signals, an advanced adversary could mask the passive emissions of a much deadlier system, like an S-400 Triumph surface-to-air missile battery. "Lead, this is 2, Rachel transmitted over the secure link, breaking the protocol of absolute silence. "I have anomalies on the EW scope. The legacy radar signatures are synthetic. I suspect we are flying into an active, masked SAM bubble. Advise we halt the Pave Hawks and gain altitude for a wider scan." There was a pause. Then Mitchell's voice snapped back, dripping with annoyance. 2, this is Lead. AWACS confirms the corridor is clean. You're looking at ghost echoes off the canyon walls. Trust the intel. Maintain radio silence and stay on my wing. Sir, the algorithms are filtering it out because it mimics ground clutter. But the raw data— Captain Hardwick, Mitchell interrupted, his tone carrying the distinct echo of General Barksdale's contempt. Stop playing on your computer and fly your jet. Out. Rachel gritted her teeth. She could drop it. She could just be a good wingman, follow orders, and let whatever happened be Mitchell's responsibility. That was what a traditional pilot would do. But she wasn't a traditional pilot. She was a desk pilot, and the data didn't lie. Without asking for permission, Rachel reached down and disabled the safety limiters on her AN/ASQ-239 electronic warfare suite. She directed her jet's active electronically scanned array, AESA radar, to fire a single, concentrated, microsecond burst of energy into the valley ahead. It was a massive risk, like turning on a flashlight in a dark room full of snipers, but it would force the enemy's cloaked systems to react. Ping. The result was instantaneous and terrifying. Her helmet display exploded in a terrifying shade of red. The synthetic legacy radar signals vanished, replaced instantly by the terrifying, high-frequency lock-on tones of an advanced S-400 battery hidden in the cliffs just 3 miles ahead. They hadn't just walked into a kill box. They were sitting squarely on the X. "Vampire, vampire," Rachel screamed into the comms. "Multiple SAM launches. Break right, lead, break right." But Mitchell was a second too late. From the tree line ahead, 3 pillars of white smoke erupted, rocketing into the sky at Mach 4. The enemy had been waiting for them to get deep into the gorge, where maneuvering was impossible. "Missile launch detected," the bitching Betty in Rachel's ear announced calmly. Mitchell threw his F-35 into a violent, gut-wrenching turn, deploying flares and chaff, his engines screaming as he pulled 9 Gs. But the missiles were advanced, radar-guided killers. They ignored the chaff, their seekers locked onto the massive heat bloom of Mitchell's afterburner. "Lead is defensive, I can't shake it," Mitchell yelled, his voice strained under the crushing G-force. Rachel threw her stick hard left, her jet dancing away from the incoming volley. She watched in horror as one of the missiles detonated just 50 feet off Mitchell's right wing. The shockwave was visible. Mitchell's F-35 was violently thrown sideways. A fireball of shrapnel shredded his right horizontal stabilizer and crippled his engine. "Mayday! Mayday! I've lost engine power. Avionics are failing." Mitchell panicked, his jet rapidly losing altitude, trailing a thick plume of black smoke. "Lead! Eject! Eject!" Liam's voice shouted from Ghost 3. "Negative. I can glide it. If I punch out here, I'm dead," Mitchell gasped. Rachel's screens were lighting up like a Christmas tree. The ambush was perfectly executed. The S-400 had forced them defensive, and now, dropping out from the cloud cover above, came the second phase of the trap. 2 Russian-made Su-35 flankers. The enemy fighters had been loitering at high altitude, engines at idle, waiting for the SAMs to scatter the American formation. Now, they were diving straight toward the vulnerable Pave Hawk helicopters, which were desperately trying to turn around in the narrow canyon. Suddenly, a heavy, static-filled voice cut through the AWACS command net. It was General Barksdale, monitoring the feed from the command center. "Ghost Flight, this is command. You are walking into a meat grinder. Abort the rescue. I repeat, abort the rescue. Egress immediately." Rachel looked at the tactical display. Mitchell was crippled, barely holding his jet in the air. The 2 Pave Hawks were trapped in the valley, flying at 50 knots. If Rachel and the rest of Ghost Flight ran, those helicopter crews, 14 men and women, would be slaughtered by the Su-35s in less than 60 seconds. General Barksdale wanted them to run. Mitchell was out of the fight. Rachel looked down at the Velcro patch on her shoulder. Desk pilot. She reached over to her weapons panel and flipped the master arm switch to on. "Ghost 3 and 4, this is Ghost 2, Rachel said, her voice eerily calm, the ice-cold focus of a million simulator hours taking over her brain. "Switch your data links to my jet. I have the master tactical picture. We are not leaving those choppers." "Hardwick, that's a direct order from the general," Liam yelled, though she could hear the hesitation in his voice. "Command is blind, Liam. We are the only ones who can see the board," Rachel replied, pulling back on the stick and driving her F-35 straight up into the vertical, directly toward the diving Su-35s. "Welcome to my server. Let's show them how a keyboard warrior fights." The F-35 Lightning II was never designed to be a traditional dogfighter. It didn't have the raw top speed or the acrobatic thrust-vectoring engines of the Russian Su-35 flanker. In a classic, turning knife fight, the flanker held the cards. But Rachel wasn't planning on fighting a classic dogfight. She was bringing a supercomputer to a knife fight. Ghost 3, Ghost 4, authenticate data link transfer, Rachel ordered, her breathing heavy as the G-forces pressed her deep into her ejection seat. Authenticated. Ghost 2. We are slaved to your sensors, Liam O'Connor replied, his jet screaming through the canyon miles behind her, safely out of the immediate visual range of the diving flankers. Pedros, this is Ghost 2, Rachel called out on the rescue frequency, contacting the lead HH-60 Pave Hawk. Hit the deck and pop smoke. I'm pulling the heat off you. Chief Warrant Officer Ryan Gallagher, the veteran pilot of the lead Pave Hawk, didn't hesitate. Copy that, Ghost 2. Dropping into the riverbed. Give 'em hell. Rachel leveled her jet at 10,000 feet, putting herself squarely between the diving Su-35S and the vulnerable helicopters below. Her helmet, mounted display system, HMDS, painted the incoming bogies as glowing red triangles. They were 30 miles out and closing at Mach 1.5. Suddenly, her radar warning receiver shrieked. The S-400 surface-to-air missile battery hidden in the canyon had re-engaged. 2 more hypersonic telegraphs of death were ripping upward, this time aimed directly at her. Ghost 2, you have dual SAM launches, Liam warned. Egress. Negative. I'm spoofing, Rachel said, her voice dropping an octave into absolute, icy focus. This was the scenario she had programmed into the Nellis Air Force Base simulators 100 times. It was a digital parlor trick that only the F-35's classified AN, ASQ, 239 electronic warfare suite could pull off. She initiated a sequence of rapid electronic pulses, bouncing signals off the canyon walls and creating a localized distortion field. To the S-400 operators on the ground, Rachel's single jet suddenly multiplied into a swarm of 12 distinct radar signatures, all scattering in different directions. The advanced SAMs, confused by the sudden barrage of phantom targets, lost their lock. One missile detonated harmlessly against a limestone cliff face, triggering a massive avalanche. The second flew wildly into the stratosphere, its seeker head completely fried by Rachel's jamming algorithm. But the Su-35S were a different story. Realizing their ground support had lost track of the American stealth fighter, the Russian pilots switched off their radars and relied on their infrared search and track (IRST) systems. They were hunting her by the heat of her engine. They're going optical, Rachel muttered. Ghost 3, I am painting the lead flanker. Fire on my data. Because Rachel had linked their jets, Liam didn't need to see the enemy. He didn't even need to use his own radar, which would have given away his position. Rachel was providing the eyes, Liam was providing the teeth. Fox 3, Liam called out. Miles away, a sleek AIM, 120D, AMRAAM, missile, dropped from the internal bay of Liam's F-35. Its rocket motor ignited, leaving a trail of white smoke as it accelerated toward the coordinates Rachel's computer was feeding it. The Russian lead pilot never saw it coming. His threat receivers were silent because the missile was receiving course corrections passively from Rachel's data link. By the time the AMRAAM went active in its terminal phase, it was too late. The missile impacted the lead, Su-35, right behind the cockpit, blowing the aircraft into a horrifying blossom of orange flame and twisting metal. Splash 1, Liam yelled. But the celebration was cut brutally short. The second Su-35 pilot, realizing the trap, threw his jet into a violent descent, hiding in the fiery debris cloud of his wingman to mask his heat signature. When he emerged, he was directly below Rachel, climbing vertically into her blind spot. Rachel's proximity alarms wailed. The flanker was merging. They were entering visual range. He's on your 6, spool, Liam shouted. Brake left. Rachel yanked the control stick, dropping flares to decoy the heat-seeking missile she knew was coming. The Russian pilot fired an R-73 Archer missile. Rachel's flares burned brighter than the sun, and the missile bit on the decoys, detonating 50 yards off her right wing. But 50 yards was too close. The shockwave slammed into Rachel's F-35 like a freight train. Shrapnel tore through the radar-absorbent skin of her right wing root. Inside the cockpit, the world went dark. Her multifunction glass displays shattered into static before fading to black. Her helmet visor, previously alive with tactical data, targeting reticles and artificial horizons, suddenly went blank. The digital symphony she had been conducting just seconds ago was violently unplugged. Alarms blared in her ears, mechanical, analog warnings that couldn't be silenced by a keystroke. Smoke began to curl from the avionics bay behind her seat. When the avionics fail, when the screens go black, the only thing that brings you home is the stick and the rudder. General Barksdale's mocking voice echoed in the claustrophobic confines of her helmet. The supercomputer was dead. She was flying a 20-ton glider with a wounded wing, and there was an apex predator sitting on her tail, lining up for a gun kill. Ghost 2, do you read? You are trailing smoke. Bail out. Liam's voice crackled through the backup VHF radio, barely audible over the roaring wind rushing past Rachel's damaged canopy. Rachel didn't answer. She couldn't. She was fighting the control stick with every ounce of her strength. Without the fly-by-wire computers smoothing out the aerodynamic instabilities, the F-35 felt like a wild, bucking bronco. The right wing wanted to dip, threatening to throw her into a fatal spin. She looked over her shoulder. The Su-35 was locked onto her tail, close enough that she could see the distinct camouflage pattern on its wings. The enemy pilot was taking his time, playing with his food, walking his 30mm cannon, fire up her exhaust trail. Fly the jet, she told herself, stripping away the analyst, the programmer, the desk pilot. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, feeling the vibration of the airframe, the sluggish response of the ailerons, the heavy, mechanical pulse of the engine. She had to fly by the seat of her pants. She opened her eyes. The Kazi Gorge rushed past her canopy at 500 miles per hour. Rachel slammed the throttle to the firewall, igniting the afterburner. The sudden burst of speed brought her a few hundred yards, but the flanker matched her pace effortlessly. She led him down, diving straight into the narrowest part of the gorge, a winding riverbed flanked by sheer, jagged rock walls. She was flying manually, relying purely on depth perception and instinct. She rolled the jet 90 degrees, threading the needle between two massive stone pillars. The Russian pilot followed, his sheer arrogance blinding him to the trap. Rachel knew the F-35's aerodynamic limits better than anyone, because she had stress-tested the digital models herself. She knew exactly how much angle of attack she could pull before the airframe stalled. "Let's see if you can read a damn iPad now," Rachel gritted her teeth. She chopped the throttle to idle and popped her speed brakes, simultaneously yanking the stick hard back and kicking the rudder pedals. It was a desperation maneuver, a brutal high-G stall that forced the F-35's nose violently upward, while shedding hundreds of knots of airspeed in a single second. The G-force crushed her chest, narrowing her vision to a tiny, grey tunnel. Blood vessels in her eyes burst. The Russian pilot, flying at near supersonic speed, couldn't react in time. He shot right underneath her, completely overshooting her position. As Rachel's jet hung in the air, teetering on the edge of a deadly flat spin, she shoved the nose down, pointing it directly at the fleeing Su-35. She didn't have a computer to calculate a firing solution. She didn't have a glowing reticle on her visor. She had a piece of grease pencil on her canopy, and her own raw judgment. She squeezed the trigger. The internal 25mm GAU-22, a rotary cannon, roared to life, vibrating the entire airframe. A stream of high-explosive incendiary rounds tore through the air, completely shredding the right wing and engine nozzle of the Su-35. The enemy jet instantly snapped into a violent barrel roll, slamming into the canyon wall in a spectacular blossom of fire and rock. Rachel gasped for air, her lungs burning, as she fought the controls to pull her stalling jet out of its dive. She leveled off a mere 50 feet above the river, her engine coughing but holding steady. "Ghost 2 to Pedros," Rachel rasped into the backup radio. "The airspace is clear. Grab the package and let's go home." Down below, Chief Warrant Officer Gallagher's voice came back, thick with disbelief. "Copy that, Ghost 2. Package is secure. We also snagged Major Mitchell from his wreck. He's banged up, but alive. We owe you a round, Hardwick." "Make it coffee," Rachel smiled weakly. Black. 2 hours later, the crippled, soot-stained F-35 limped onto the runway at FOB Falcon. Half the base had gathered on the tarmac. As Rachel shut down the engine and unstrapped from her seat, the adrenaline finally left her system. leaving her shaking and exhausted. She climbed down the ladder, her legs feeling like lead. Standing at the bottom, arms crossed, was Lieutenant General Richard Barksdale. The crowd of pilots and maintainers around them fell silent. Mitchell, favoring a broken arm, stood a few paces behind the general. Barksdale looked at the gaping shrapnel holes in Rachel's jet. He looked at the burnt, scorched metal where her advanced sensors used to be. Then, he looked at Rachel. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Barksdale reached out, unvelcroed the desk pilot patch from her shoulder, and handed it to her. Then, he raised his hand and offered a slow, crisp, and deeply respectful salute. Rachel squared her tired shoulders, returning the salute. The keyboard warrior had brought them home. Did Captain Hardwick's incredible, pulse-pounding story leave you on the edge of your seat? Real heroism happens when technical brilliance meets unbreakable courage under fire. If you loved this deep dive into modern aerial combat and the grit of the pilots who fly it, smash that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more jaw-dropping, true-to-life military stories. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. See you in the next mission.